When someone accuses you, criticizes you, or questions you in a way that feels unfair, your first instinct is probably to explain yourself, to show them the truth, to make them understand your side. That feels natural because we've been trained to believe that defending ourselves clears our name. But in reality, defending yourself does something you don't realize in the moment. It tells the other person that their words carry enough power to put you in a position where you have to prove yourself. And the moment you do that, you've stepped into the wrong role. Think about it like this. When you defend yourself, you're walking straight into a courtroom where the other person is the judge. You're handing them a gavel and saying, "Decide if I'm guilty or innocent." That doesn't sound like power. That sounds like submission. And the truth is, they never had that kind of authority to begin with. By defending yourself, you actually give them control over the conversation, even if they don't deserve it. You shift from being an equal to being someone trying to earn approval. That's why defending is dangerous. Now, this doesn't mean you shouldn't clarify when there's confusion, but clarification and defense are two completely different things. Clarification is calm, factual, and why defending yourself never works grounded in confidence. Defense, on the other hand, is reactive. It's emotional. It's you scrambling to prove your worth in someone else's eyes. And that difference matters because people don't just hear your words, they feel your energy. The moment you start defending yourself, your tone and body language reveal that you're under pressure, and that weakens your position without you realizing it. What most people don't realize is that defending yourself actually keeps the conflict alive. Imagine someone says, "You're always late," and you respond with, "No, I'm not. I was on time yesterday and the day before." Now you're arguing inside the frame they created. The focus is no longer on whether their statement is even fair. It's on whether you can disprove it. And the more energy you spend defending, the stronger their accusation looks. They don't have to work hard anymore because you've taken on all the work of proving. That's the trap. Here's the deeper problem. When you defend yourself, you're operating from a place of insecurity, even if you don't see it that way. Because if you were completely secure in who you are, their words wouldn't pull you into proving anything. Think about the strongest leaders, the most confident people you know. They don't rush to defend themselves against every comment or criticism. They stand steady. They let words bounce off them. That doesn't mean they don't care. It means they know that defending themselves is not the same thing as standing in their truth. Defending is also short-term relief, but long-term damage. In the moment, it feels good to throw back explanations or arguments because you think it sets the record straight. But later, you realize you've actually validated the other person's power. You've shown them exactly how to push your buttons and get a reaction. People remember that, and once they know they can pull you into defense mode, they'll use it against you again. So by defending, you're training people on how to control you, even if that's not your intention. The reality is this: the most powerful people don't defend themselves because they don't accept the premise that they're on trial. They know their value isn't determined by someone else's words. They know their truth doesn't require permission, and they know that defense doesn't prove strength, it proves pressure. So the next time someone comes, the trap of over-explaining at you with a criticism before you rush to explain yourself, pause. Notice the pull to defend, because the very act of defending is silently telling the other person, "You're right. I owe you proof," when in fact, you don't. Every conversation operates inside a frame. A frame is simply the perspective that sets the rules for how the conversation unfolds. Whoever controls the frame controls the direction, the tone, and the outcome. Most people don't even realize a frame exists, and because of that, they walk into someone else's frame without question. That's when arguments spiral out of control. The person who sets the frame dictates the game, and if you're not aware of it, you end up playing by rules you never agreed to in the first place. Think about a time when someone accused you of something. The moment you start explaining or defending, you've already accepted their frame that you owe them proof. They've set the terms, and you've stepped inside it. That's why you feel cornered, because you're no longer in control of the direction. Controlling the frame doesn't mean being aggressive or manipulative. It means recognizing when someone is trying to box you into a role you don't belong in and having the confidence to step outside of it instead of playing along. The power of controlling the frame lies in understanding that conversations aren't just about words, they're about positioning. If someone says you're selfish, the frame is that their opinion defines your character. If you immediately say, "No, I'm not, here's why," you've accepted that their judgment matters more than your reality. But if you respond with calm presence, something as simple as, "That's an interesting way to see it," you shift the frame. You're no longer in their courtroom. You've reestablished yourself as equal, not as the accused. Frames show up everywhere in the workplace, in relationships, even in casual conversations. For example, if a boss says, "You're not working hard enough," and you instantly start rattling off your accomplishments, you've accepted their frame of inadequacy. Instead, you could say, "Help me understand what you mean by hard enough." That question shifts the frame from accusation to clarification. You've moved from proving yourself to making them define their terms. That's control, and it shows you won't just absorb someone else's silence as a powerful response perspective without challenge. Controlling the frame also prevents escalation. When people throw accusations or sharp words, they want you to react. They want you inside their frame because that's where they feel powerful. But the moment you refuse to play that role, the energy changes. They may push harder at first, but eventually they realize you're not giving them the fuel they expect. Instead of defending, you're calmly redirecting. Instead of explaining, you're holding steady. And that stability forces the other person to adjust, because frames only work when both people agree to them. It takes practice to notice frames in real time, because most of us are wired to respond instantly. But once you start paying attention, you'll see them everywhere. Every time someone says, "Why are you always or you never?" they're setting a frame. Your job isn't to prove them wrong. Your job is to decide whether you accept that frame or reshape it. Sometimes that means asking a question. Sometimes that means staying quiet. Sometimes it means calmly saying, "That's not how I see it." Each response keeps you outside their box. The key is remembering that control isn't about dominating the other person. It's about not letting them dominate you. When you control the frame, you keep your power. You keep your dignity. You keep the ability to decide how the conversation goes instead of being dragged into battles you can't win. The person who controls the frame doesn't have to be the loudest or the sharpest. They just have to be the one who refuses to step into someone else's story and instead writes their own inside every interaction. One of the hardest skills in communication is learning how to acknowledge what someone says without feeling the need to justify yourself. Most people blur those two together. They think acknowledging is the same thing as agreeing, so they immediately go into defense mode. But acknowledgement is not agreement. It's simply showing you heard the words without stepping into the trap of proving yourself. The moment you add justification, you hand over your power. But when you stop at acknowledgement, calm boundaries that earn respect, you keep control of the conversation and protect your confidence. Let's say someone says, "You don't care about me." Your natural instinct might be to argue back, list the things you've done, or explain how much you actually care. That's justification. But when you do that, you've accepted their frame and placed yourself on trial. Acknowledgement sounds different. It might be as simple as, "I hear that's how you feel." Notice the shift. You're not agreeing with them. You're not defending yourself. You're simply recognizing their perspective without allowing it to define you. That's the power of acknowledgement. Acknowledgement works because it diffuses tension instead of adding fuel. When people come at you with accusations or strong emotions, they're often looking for a fight. They want you to defend because defense keeps the conflict alive. But when you acknowledge calmly, the wind comes out of their sails. They expect pushback, but instead you give presence. That pause forces them to reconsider their approach because without your justifications, they have nothing to argue against. It's like dropping the rope in a tug of war. The game stops when you refuse to pull. The biggest mistake people make is believing that if they don't justify themselves, they'll look guilty. But the opposite is true. Justification shows insecurity. It shows that the other person's words got under your skin enough to make you scramble for explanations. Acknowledgement, on the other hand, shows strength. It communicates, "I'm steady, I heard you, and I don't need to prove myself. That kind of presence carries authority. It doesn't silence the other person, but it removes their power to drag you into endless explanations that never satisfy them anyway. Here's a workplace example. Your boss says, "You dropped the ball on this project." A defensive, justifying response sounds like, "I didn't drop the ball. I was waiting on someone else, and here's why it wasn't my fault." That only digs you deeper. An acknowledgement sounds like, "I hear your concern." Can you clarify where you felt the ball was dropped? Notice the difference. You're not graveling. You're not excusing. You're opening space for clarity. You move the focus away from defense and toward understanding, which keeps the frame balanced instead of tilted against you. In personal relationships, this tool is just as powerful. When a partner or family member throws an emotional accusation, you don't win by explaining yourself into exhaustion. You win by how to stop emotional triggers, listening without defensiveness. A simple acknowledgement, "I get that you're upset," or "I see that this matters to you," goes farther than a 10-minute explanation. People don't always want proof. They want to feel heard. And when you separate acknowledgement from justification, you give them that without sacrificing your dignity in the process. That's how respect is built. The discipline here is restraint. It's resisting the temptation to prove yourself right. It's knowing that acknowledgement alone is enough. It's practicing the calm confidence to let someone's words exist without feeling like you owe them an essay in response. Over time, this becomes second nature, and you'll notice people respond differently to you. The ones who used to bait you into defense won't get the same satisfaction. The ones who actually value communication will lean in because acknowledgement without justification creates space for real conversation instead of endless battles. When someone challenges you, the default reaction is to answer. They make an accusation, you respond. They throw a question with a sharp edge, you explain. But here's the problem. Every time you answer, you step into their frame. You're now playing defense instead of holding steady. A stronger move is to replace answers with questions. Asking instead of answering changes the balance of power. It takes the pressure off you to prove yourself and places the responsibility back where it belongs on the other person to explain their words, their assumptions, and their reasoning. Imagine someone says, "Why are you always so difficult?" The typical reaction might be to defend yourself with reasons. "I'm not difficult. You just don't understand me. I was only trying to." That's answering, and answering traps you. A better response is to calmly ask, "What makes you say that?" That simple question shifts the focus. Instead of you scrambling to prove you're not difficult, they now have to unpack their own accusation. The conversation changes from you proving your innocence to them clarifying their position, which is where the accountability belongs. Questions have a unique power because they slow down the pace of conflict. When someone is trying to provoke, they want speed. They want a quick defensive reaction. They want to see you flustered, but a calm question interrupts that rhythm. It forces the other person to pause and think. It turns the spotlight back onto them. And in that pause, you regain control. That's why asking is not a weak move. It's one of the strongest moves you can make in communication. It shows dealing with toxic and manipulative people composure, and composure always carries authority. Another example, let's say someone tells you, "You're not committed to this team." The knee-jerk answer is to list everything you've done, all the late nights, all the effort, but that's answering. And answering is defending. Instead, try asking, "What makes you feel that way?" Or, "What does commitment look like to you?" Those questions don't just protect your position. They open space for clarity. Many times you'll find the accusation is vague or rooted in emotion, and when asked to explain, the other person realizes their words don't carry as much weight as they thought. The beauty of asking is that it's disarming without being aggressive. You're not fighting back. You're not shutting down. You're simply redirecting the energy. It's like holding up a mirror instead of a shield. And people can't argue with a mirror. They have to face themselves. The more you practice this, the more natural it becomes. It's not about dodging responsibility. It's about refusing to carry a burden that doesn't belong to you. By asking instead of answering, you make the conversation about understanding instead of about proving. In personal situations, this approach also creates space for empathy. For example, if a partner says, "You never listen to me," instead of answering with, "That's not true, I always listen," ask, "Can you tell me a time you felt unheard?" That question doesn't just diffuse conflict, it digs into the root issue. Asking shows that you're open to dialogue, but without taking on unnecessary blame. It shifts the interaction from battle to exploration, and that change can transform tense conversations into meaningful ones without you losing your grounding. This tool works because questions signal confidence. Insecure people rush to answer. Grounded people take their time and redirect with curiosity. It's not about interrogation, it's about maintaining balance. The moment you start asking instead of answering, you change the rules of the conversation. You no longer look like someone desperate to prove a point. You look like someone who isn't shaken by what's being said. And that shift in energy speaks louder than any defense you could give because it shows you're steady enough to lead the direction forward. In the freedom of walking away every heated interaction, there's a choice. You can react or you can stay grounded. Reacting feels natural because it's immediate. Someone criticizes you, you snap back. Someone questions you, you rush to defend. It feels like protecting yourself. But in reality, reacting means you've given them control over your emotions. Staying grounded, on the other hand, is refusing to let their words dictate your state. It's keeping calm when they expect you to explode. It's steady tone, steady body language, steady presence. That steadiness is what communicates true strength. When you react, you hand over your power. You allow the other person to set the tempo and the tone of the conversation. They raise their voice. You raise yours. They throw an accusation. You scramble for a defense. And the entire time, they're controlling you without even realizing it. But when you stay grounded, the roles flip. You're not matching their energy. You're holding your own. And when you hold steady, the contrast between your calm and their chaos is undeniable. People notice it. It changes the dynamic immediately. Grounded doesn't mean emotionless. It doesn't mean you don't care. It means you've trained yourself to pause before responding. That pause is where your power lives. In that moment, you're choosing not to be pulled by someone else's storm. You're choosing to breathe, to listen, to respond in a way that reflects your values, not their provocation. Most conflicts escalate because both sides are reacting to each other like dominoes. But if one person refuses to tip over, the chain reaction ends. That person is the grounded one, and that's who holds the real authority. Here's a practical example. Someone says, "You're so irresponsible." A reactive response would be, "No, I'm not. You're the irresponsible one." That fuels the fire. A grounded response could be silence, a calm breath, or a simple, steady acknowledgement like, "I hear that's how you see it." Notice the difference. One keeps the cycle spinning. The other stops it cold. Staying grounded doesn't just protect your peace. It sets the tone for the entire interaction. It tells the other final thoughts and motivation person, "I won't play your game," without ever having to say those words. The hardest part about staying grounded is that it requires self-control in moments when your emotions want to take over. Anger, defensiveness, embarrassment, they all push you toward reacting. That's why grounding is a skill you have to build. It's about practicing calm even when it feels unnatural. Over time, you train your nervous system to slow down instead of speed up in conflict. The more you practice it, the more natural it becomes. And when it becomes natural, you start to carry that steadiness into every area of your life. What makes grounded people stand out is that they're not easy to manipulate. When you're reactive, anyone who wants to get under your skin can succeed by pressing the right button. They know exactly what to say to trigger you. But when you're grounded, those buttons don't work anymore. Their words might sting, but they don't control you. That makes you unpredictable in the best way because people realize they can't steer you with drama, guilt, or provocation.